Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Talking Each Other Home. I am your host, Dani, and joining me, I have Bradley Moore. And I met him through this coaching program called Thought Leader that I'm enrolled in right now to help me learn how to do a TED Talk. And so I had a coaching call with Bradley and I was telling him about my talk and alignment and remembering and all of these things. And all of a sudden our conversation turned really spiritual and we were both just like, have you heard of this? Oh my God. Oh my God. And so I was like, we need to continue this outside of this coaching call because I feel like we could talk for hours about these subjects. And would you like to come on my podcast? And did we just become best friends? And so today was finally the day where we got to continue our conversation. And I mean, we went pretty deep, you guys, and kind of all over the place too. And I mean, that's kind of how spirituality works when you're into it like that. And we talk a little bit about our experiences with psychedelics, with awakening, and then of course, quoting like tons of awesome spiritual teachers like Socrates and Ram Dass and Alan Watts and Wayne Dyer. And oh my God. So, and we even got into quantum physics a little bit too. And so this was really fun for me to be able to banter back and forth about spirituality with somebody. And so it was nourishing for my soul. In a way, it was challenging for my mind and how we were like articulating different things and talking about our stories and different things that we love and have integrated and have experienced. And so all of that to say, you can tell my excitement is I hope that you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed recording it. And if you're into spirituality and philosophy and awakening and just exploring and kind of like going through all of these things, I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast. So thank you, Bradley, for joining me. This was amazing. We'll have to do this again sometime soon. And everybody, thank you so much for joining me. And I hope, I know you're going to enjoy this episode. Okay, I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Bradley, what's up? And welcome to the show, my friend.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week. How are we?
Awesome. Me too. I'm doing good. So I was just telling you that I'm in the middle of a fast right now, a 2-day water fast. Well, I'm on day 2 and I'm going till actually the Sunday is a full moon and lunar eclipse. Did you know that?
I did not. I know
I
about
didn't
retrograde. Everyone is using it for excuses. Various places in my life, they're like, oh, I forgot to wash my car retrograde.
Oh, that's so funny. And earlier, well, so there is a full moon coming up. And before I started the fast, I actually didn't know that. And so I was going to go for 3 days, but I think I'm going to end it on the full moon. So I'm going to go for 4 days, which feels pretty good right now. I feel actually okay. The headache is gone and all of that stuff. And speaking of Mercury retrograde, I don't know a ton about it, but doesn't it kind of mess with technology and things like that or something?
You might be right. This is my first. I've heard of it in the past, but I've never like researched it or so.
Okay.
They could be credible excuses. So if those people watch, don't hate me.
Because earlier I thought it was with technology and communication, and earlier I was recording a podcast and our Zoom cut out. Luckily, everything still got recorded and uploaded just fine, but about I don't know, 75% of the way through, it cut out. And I was like, oh my God, no. And she disappeared. I disappeared. So maybe there is something to this Mercury retrograde stuff, but we're just going to pray that it's all going to go smooth today for us. Okay. So our meeting was actually pretty cool how me and you got connected. And so I don't know. I just want to give a little brief synopsis of that well, actually, maybe let's start out with that with you, because you're actually more in the coach's seat on that point.
Sure. So you mean in terms of TL and how I got there and all that?
Yeah, and then how we connected, and then now we're friends and going forward.
So Dani and I connected through essentially we call it a welcome call at our company, and it's basically an introduction into what we do at TL, which is land people Tedx Talks. And so we connected, and instantly I started to see some similarities just in her background. I saw the prayer flags and the mala beads, and so we had a great conversation there. And as I do in many of these conversations, I'm like, man, we need to link up after this and have a chat about what the really interesting part of this conversation was. And so that's kind of where this all spawned.
Yes, it did. And we totally went spiritual and deep. We were talking about like different dimensions and psychedelics and all of these cool things. And I'm like, did we just become best friends? I think we did.
Yeah.
So I know a little bit of your story. I don't know what I know, like a brief kind of, you walked me through it last time, but I would love to know, just to give people a background on who we're talking with here, your journey, and start wherever you want and end, I guess, where you are now, kind of being this spiritual sprinkle of pixie dust in everybody's life and all the lessons that you've learned. And it's been really cool to listen to you and your knowledge and stuff. So I guess just lay it out.
Perfect. So long story short, or short story long, I don't know which one it'll turn into. So essentially I came out of high school, classic, typical American education. I thought I was completely done. I didn't read, and the classic. I started getting paid enough to buy things, and I was like, okay, cool. I can put all the other stuff aside, and that worked for so long as the material could keep up with like my actual happiness.
Mm,
And I think it all kind of culminated from the first time was actually didn't really have anything to do with psychedelics. It was I had a long relationship with someone who, and this was just like a scratch at the surface of me starting to realize there's something deeper than the ego and materialism. So it was almost like that's what pushed the door open enough for the eventual psychedelic journey. But essentially a bad breakup. It wasn't a great relationship, and so there was one. I was like the kind of like the rubber band effect of me realizing, okay, this is done, and right here and right now is when I need to deal with all the emotions and trauma and whatever else comes with a high school breakup.
yeah.
And I remember in that moment, just it was kind of it was surrendering. Really, I was just like, well, this is just what it is, and it is what it is. It is what it is. What is it? It's a breakup, and this is what we have to do. I was listening to some Joe Rogan clip, and he was like just talking about like trying to hang on in relationships, and like the way that kind of creates this. It's almost like a personality of like a web now, because now you're trying to fill that gap where this person, especially when you come out of high school, I think you build a lot of these initial like intimacy pieces of your life that you and I can probably say we now have with ourselves in terms of like meditation and loving yourself basically. But that is oftentimes keyed to a person, I think,
Mhm.
originally, right? And when you split from that person, I mean, I can feel the goosebumps now of like that feeling of like, okay, that is done. I need to figuring out how to give that to yourself is that was the surrendering. It was like, okay, I have to figure this shit out myself basically. Like I can no longer rely on this person. It's not healthy. And so that
Mm,
was really like the first chink in the armor of my ego. It was like, I'm just gonna have to settle with like, I'm not gonna fix this person. It's the pride of like all of the, I mean, I lost almost all of my friends trying to protect this relationship. And so it was just all this culmination of I just have to reset. And that eventually led into 5 years of kind of like growing up at UPS, discipline, and eventually it kind of turned back towards the materialism, and eventually I found Alan Watts. I started to run at night, and my first real, I won't call it mystical, it was just really badass. Basically, I was running along the levee and I saw like a massive asteroid or meteorite. I don't know the correct term for when it's actually in the atmosphere, but it was just sweet. It was nighttime and I was by myself listening to Alan talk about how the ego is some superficial, like, it doesn't exist, and all these existential things that he's good at articulating. And it was just right there was another interesting like chink in the armor. And I'm like, what is really going on like in reality? But I often ask myself that driving home. And then eventually I just tried 6 grams of psychedelics to get to be completely honest. And that was what, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into the depths of that journey yourself, because I can run on and on about it, but I don't know how you feeling. I feel like I just ran on for a while.
no, that's perfect. I'm curious about the psychedelic journey because that's something that has helped me through different dark nights of the soul and creating space between this identity and the next one. So I'm kind of curious about your journey and what happened. 6 grams. That's it. And you went
Well,
from 0 to 6 grams.
so I had one experience in high school, but it was, it was high school, so I didn't really have much introspection capability, really.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of just hanging out with my buddy, and there was definitely something in that experience where I was kind of like interested, but I just didn't have enough knowledge about life, biology, and how anything worked really to make sense of it.
Hmm.
And so essentially, I came to a point where I was kind of like plateauing. Like I ran every night grade, I'm saving money, blah blah blah, and I was like doing all the things that people were like, well, this will create your white picket fence, that American dream fantasy, which is a thing, right? But was trying to grab it from outside of the world, right? Like I had a Mustang and I was, it was huge payment on it. It was like a weight on my life. It was definitely not helpful in picking up women or impressing people either. It was only a 6-cylinder tier, but it was just the material things that I was like kind of compounding. I'm like, okay, I've got the car. Okay, I can now save my 401k. Okay, I got a good job at UPS. All right, I'm now mentoring people. Okay, I'm giving back to people. Okay, I'm donating to charity. All right, I'm running. Okay, I've got all these aspects, like the 5 real major things, like your relationships, your finances, your physical, mental health, and then the one I was missing was my spirituality, or I call it creativity for people who are like woo-woo adverse.
Yeah.
you know, but that's the most important one. That's where the real contribution. I mean, it's interesting to explain, but essentially, I was like, okay, Joseph Campbell, Alan Watts. I read a little bit Aldous Huxley. All these people are like, psychedelics was really helpful in my life to understand. And I'm like, okay, so if a Harvard professor, Ram Dass more specifically, is gonna, I mean, because I had a little bit of education and I've been in a business now, and I'm like, okay, people don't just go and do psychedelics and leave all of the like comforts of being a tenured professor at Harvard, I think he was, right? So I'm like, okay, let me just do this like one time and let's not play around in microdose. Let me just do enough to where I'll know if something's going to happen. Like I was going to do 7.5, but luckily my brother was there and I got a little squeamish. And so he took the other, I won't name the brother just in case, but he took the other, and that was invaluable to me to have someone who was barely there with me. But I mean, there was points where I would look at him and be like, he wouldn't know how to say something to our caretaker and like explain what he was, and he was just like, and so I'd be like, no, what he's saying is it's really uncomfortable for you to, we feel like we're judging us. And you know what I mean? And you'd have to explain it. And he'd be like, yes, exactly. And then, that breath of air when you're in that state where you're like, okay, they understand, everything's okay, I can relax. And it just spiraled up from there. I mean, there's lessons on lessons on lessons. I mean, honestly, I often think about just like asking people, like pick fear, pick doubt, pick a, I don't know if there's like a category for those, but I mean, we could just talk about doubt. Like, so there's a point in the experience where, and it almost felt like it got to the point where I was like having a conversation with my subconscious, where I would ask a question and it would immediately like, okay, here's the answer, but there was no ego involved. So I didn't have to question the answer. Right. And so I asked it at one point, okay, what if I kill off myself? Right. And obviously I'm like comatose on the couch right now. I'm in the peak of this trip. So I'm meaning this figuratively. And the voice is just like, okay, then you die. And I was like, okay, let's do it. Cool. And so I could feel like it was just a release, and it wasn't some huge thing that I was like, I didn't make noise. It was just like, it was a mental acceptance of like, okay, the ego just died. Like Bradley's gone. Cause I was just that like zooted, you know what I mean? To use this, a young hip term.
Yeah.
And at that moment I was like, okay, then what am I? And the voice was like, well, you're God. And it wasn't like I had to go and read the Bible and like, okay, I summon snakes from sticks, but it was like, it instantaneously, I was like, okay, logically that makes sense, because if I'm nothing, I'm no thing, then I'm everything, right? That makes me God, because that's what God is. The proverbial God, if you look at any religion, is essentially it's the that you can't ever get to, and during the trip, and that's what makes it fun and mysterious. And so that was the lesson of like, don't fear the surrendering, right? Don't doubt the answers that you already have inside you, right? You could talk about fear, any of them.
Well, I want to comment on the God thing first. So I'm going through this thing. Have you ever done a holotropic breath work, where it's like you breathe over and over again and it releases natural DMT in your brain? And
I've definitely heard a little bit about it. I haven't done it, but I sometimes I will just deep breaths, and it does. You can just definitely tell. I don't know what the science behind it is, but
so the ones I've been doing lately have been, it takes like a breathwork facilitator. So my friend Autumn, and next time I run one, I'll invite you to it. It's like $33. It's a cup, it's like 3 hours long, but you breathe for the real breath work is for the hour, and you're inhaling, exhaling, and like your body starts to tingle, your hands cramp, your mouth kind of cramps a little bit. But when you're finished with the work, you settle and you kind of go back to your normal state. And lately I've been having conversations with my higher self in those states. And it's been like a one word answer, just like bam. And so when you're breathing like that, you release natural DMT in your brain. And so the veil becomes very thin between you and your higher self, or you and some people get visited, in like a mediumship or psychic stuff happens, or just that veil becomes very thin. And it kind of like, in a way, I guess you breathe your ego out of the way. And so I've been getting little hits like that too, almost like I would in a psychedelic experience, because it is DMT is psychedelic. And so I've been getting that too about you are God. And I was like, and I asked my higher self or whoever I was talking to, and I was like, well, how do I know that I am God? And it said, because I
Yeah.
am. And I was like, freaking has this little sense of humor too. Like, I am that I am. And it was, then the next thing I said was, how do I access you? And it said stillness. And then, there was a series of questions, but they all made super sense. And it was just like one answer, boom, there was no judgment around it. And when I first started to do these breathwork sessions, I thought, am I just thinking these answers? Or is this something that's really being told to me?
Right.
But I just trusted that it was something that was really being told to me. And one of them, I was like, okay, well, what do I do with this information? And it said, speak. And what's cool about that is like my whole, the talk that I'd like to do is all about remembering who we are. And that the whole conversation was about remembering, and how many times a day do you give yourself to remember who you are? Like, do you meditate? Do you have an altar? But like whatever we would do. And yeah, so I thought that was just interesting. So I got a similar hit about being God. With, I guess, it's another psychedelic molecule going on in my brain and body. And DMT. So okay. So that's just what I want to comment on that. I can relate to that in a very big way. Yeah. Just one more thing on that. When I was in Sedona doing breath work with the facilitators, my whole body was like convulsing. I mean, just like shaking. And I'm kind of a skeptic with stuff like that. So for my whole body to be like going through these little tremors, I was releasing something, but then at the end of it, I was receiving something. And it was like my higher self, like, don't you see yourself? Don't you see who you are? And it was almost like saying, like, don't you feel you? And that's then started the conversations with myself from that point on. So it's just all about remembering and being God, and we are divine and all of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So now I'm curious to know what you have to say about fear, because that just spun me off on a whole new tangent. But what did the mushrooms teach you about fear?
I think that was a great point. Honestly, we could talk about that
Okay.
a little bit more
Yeah.
if you're interested by it. Fear is
Sure.
always there, but this is a perfect place to kind of like tie into fear. So I find it so interesting that you have different techniques, including. So I see the common theme here is the release of the ego's ability to like cause anxiety about thinking something, right? So normally when you're like, before any of this happened, like I wouldn't even use the word God because I thought it was such a trite, overused, like overloaded term. And after the experience, once you understand, it's almost like it sounds almost arrogant to even say this, but you can kind of understand why Buddha said the things he did. You can kind of, it gives you a different perspective on the words they were saying, right? So that's really what the spiritual journey is. It's like, I don't know. I think enlightenment is really the start. It's like enlightenment is the realization that this thing that you've been given. So when you're a baby, you have no, and I mean, this is a point that everyone talks about. And I know it's probably ran in the ground, but when you start as a baby, you don't have an ego, you don't have a personality, you're just there. You're so it's almost like a tiger doesn't think hunt, it just tigers. It reacts. It's like a constant. And so that's, and I'm getting real bad at myself, but that's like the Garden of Eden, right? So when you talk about the Garden of Eden, it's just being is the whole thing, a whole thing of that parable or metaphor, whatever you want to call it, right? That's like nirvana. That's like, to your point, and what I'm bringing it full circle to is when you have those moments where the ego has just been like, oh, whatever, dude. If you're just going to breathe for 35 minutes and not think about cigarettes and whatever your vice is, personally mine would be mud water and like another ensign or something. And you know what I mean? And once that subsides though, you're a baby again, but you're also an adult, and you understand physics a little bit, and you know how to drive a car, and you know what it means to serve someone, and you know about empathy, and you know how to show up for a job and have a successful date with someone. So you have the toolkit of the ego. But when you remember, holy shit, I'm actually just interlaced in this entire fabric of, I mean, that's the feeling of being God. Like, I think it was worth exploring. And something that I found an interesting thing in my spiritual experience, and I wonder if you could relate to this, is like, it's almost like a letdown for me. It was almost a letdown for me afterwards, because I was like, oh man, I don't get to like shoot fireballs, because I love anything like medieval, like mages and witchcraft and sorcery, and like that would be sick. I would love to shoot lightning from my hands. One of the biggest realizations from that experience was being God isn't, you don't get it. There's no bonus level up. You don't get tyranny. You don't get to be powerful. You just get to, what it comes down to is really you get to serve, right? And so to your point, when you're clear like that, you hear speak, that's this, I mean, Jita Krishnamurti talks about us all having the same subconscious. And I'm not claiming that's true, but it's almost really interesting when you think about having like a source or a ground or any of these terms, like the Brahman from the Hinduism circle. I mean, we could go on and on, right? But that's what causes that fear, though, is, so it's almost, I'm picturing like there's like a connection, baby and awakening, right? And when you're born, you're clean, like your slate's clean. There's no, you're ugly, you're this, you're that, you're white male, you're, blah, blah, blah. You have acne, no one loves you, whatever you hear in life, right? And at the end of the trip here, this is where you realize, holy shit, I've woken up to the fact that the ego is kind of just like, I don't want to say not real, because it's there and useful, but it's not the actual you. That's just the layered on stuff that you've been using to navigate whatever the hell this is. And so you leave the Garden of Eden the second you identify as separate, right? And then you take this long journey outside the garden, and you wake up. And Joseph calls it, I call him Joseph Campbell. He calls it, you eat of the garden of I think it's the tree of knowledge, right? And then you separate from the Garden of Eden, because now you understand that you're separate, and you can't tiger anymore, because there's a space between the impulse and the stimuli, or the stimuli and the impulse. Meaning when there's no, that he can think about it now. And that's when you get like Jungle Book, where he's like, I want to go and take vengeance now. Like tigers don't have that. It's stimulus reaction. And that's being, in that garden where you don't have the choice. But the real gift, I guess, is what I'm trying to say from the spiritual and psychedelic awakening, is you realize you now get to see it all, right? And so that expels the fear instantly when you realize that there's no you that's going to be lost to the world once you die, right? And so fear just kind of abolishes itself. I mean, I remember about 2 weeks after the trip, I felt insane for about a week. I wouldn't go back to it unless it was, maybe I will. I definitely will. Okay, let me just be honest. Eventually I will, but I don't feel like a necessary urge to go and just, experiment anymore. I feel like the goose is cooked. And so I basically, I was just having this anxiety about like not having, like, is my ego fucking real? Am I real? What the hell's going on right now? And I would just be alone downstairs. The dogs would be sleeping and there's no noise. And I was just like, okay, we got to deal with this right here, right now. Like, if just die right here to it then. And then I pictured just like, your typical static monster with like white eyes, the big, something really scary. And I was like, okay, just take the body then. Like, go for it, bro. Because then you get to be me, and you can be something, and I'll be you, and I'll be no thing, and I'll be everything and bipartisan. Because if you're not a thing, you get to be everything, which is that fear of like, we're going to lose and be not a thing, right? I was like, what am I going to be when I die? Okay, I won't be a thing. And I literally said it to myself in my head, and I'm like, okay, what does that make me? Everything. Okay, boom, I am God. Like it's just a simple realization. It's not power. It's not money or fame or a Bible that you write. You don't get to be on the wall in my spiritual sanctum that I'll eventually create, like the other icon. You know what I mean? It's not like that. I don't feel that I need that. It's just service. Your goose is cooked now, and you get to be the bodhisattva. And why would you fear at that point, right? Obviously, you fear for the people around you, and I don't know, like, how you feel about it. But if I got shot in the street, I'd probably still be like, damn, no, not yet. But I would hope to be like Gandhi and be like, hey, I forgive you. At least get to that point before this collection of memories finally disperses from this particular vibration pattern that they call Bradley. that makes sense? I don't know, I kind of rambled there at the end, but there's no fear once you don't identify with being separate.
Yes, definitely. And that's something I'm actually learning in the Bhagavad Gita. Have you ever studied that before or know the story?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm only on chapter 3, but I'm going through it with a Hindu teacher, which I'm so like,
Sick.
oh my God, I'm like drooling. It's like the best. She like speaks in Sanskrit and she's like right out of India and all of these things. So she's walking us through the book, but something that has been hitting me really hard lately, especially as my grandfather, he's actually like kind of old, like end of life kind of situation. And I'm understanding that Arjuna didn't want to fight, you know, his cousins and his teachers and things like that in the battlefield. And he was grieving for something that isn't real, basically. So Krishna
Yep.
was telling him that like what you're grieving for is not real, and we shouldn't grieve for them because we are eternal. There's nowhere for us to go, and we'll just be back again and things like that. And so I guess just thinking about the ego self and how it's like earth guide only, kind of a Wayne Dyer thing, but how it's like it's necessary. And I used to think that it was so not necessary. And we can get into that in a second. But thinking about the eternalness of who we are and how there is nothing separate and how we're never born or we're never die. We just transfer from whatever to whatever. That's something that I'm also learning about in the Gita. And it's been hitting me really hard too. And I don't even know how to fully say that to my family or to have to people that are suffering of losing somebody or anything like that, because I don't even know that I could say it or it's my place, but it's an understanding that that's starting to drop into me. And maybe that's all it is. It's like my mentor calls it a dawning. And like you start
Okay.
to, it's a dawning, like you don't all of a sudden get these crazy powers and whatever it is, or maybe you do get some cities, right? As you start to do your thing. But it's more so like a dawning and a knowing and a trusting and an understanding and a stillness that drops in,
Mm-hmm.
and a piece that like this is real, but there's also another level of reality that's even more real than the reality that we're sitting in. So
Yeah.
I don't even know how I got to that point, but I had to bring up the Gita because I know you mentioned some yoga stuff there too. And yeah, I think on one level, when you come to understand that we are the real I is eternal, the real who we are is eternal, then a lot of fear does dissipate, a lot of anxiety does dissipate.
Exactly.
I wonder if it fully does ever, because we are still human and experiencing these things.
Yeah.
Do you think it ever fully dissipates?
That was another interesting piece of the journey of my trip, actually. So that was like directly after I asked, okay, if I'm God, what does that mean? Blah 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, you're God, bro. And then I figured that little piece out, and then just that simple little change of the way you look at things. And then after that, I was like, okay, what happens if I kill God? Like metaphorically. And it was like, whoa, 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 whoa. You don't want to do that because what are you going to compare against? And I was like, what a simple fucking answer though. But it's the truth. To your point, why would, if you get rid of humanity, I mean, I'll just lean on my buddy Ram Dass. He says, if you're on the beautiful snow white peak of Everest, of the metaphorical height of guru-ness, right? And you're just so peace and blissed out and you're not even here anymore. You're too busy looking up, you can't see the blood on the snow, right? But if you're too busy looking at the blood on the snow, you forget about the beautiful sky and all of this. I mean, the literal heaven we get to see is conscious beings on earth. And so I think that's the middle path. That's the dance that we take, that Buddha talks about. And that's this point is now you've wrangled all of this shit right here, and you go, okay, none of that's real. I don't have to be anxiety. I don't have to have anxiety about all, when I got pantsed in middle school, or whatever in between baby and awakening happened to you that you cling to in terms of the anxiety and the doubt and all that. But so it's almost like you have to surrender to all that. You're like, okay, I am that, but I'm also everything else. So, but it doesn't ever go away. I mean, I think the main thing to remember is just not everyone is ever going to be awakened, and maybe they will be. I don't know. I've done a lot of deliberating about that with myself. Like, I don't know if I would want everybody to be, maybe on some level, but I always want the ego there, right? Because I don't want to live with 40 people. I got to be honest. People are nasty. Some people don't wipe after themselves when they make dinner, right? I like living, in a space that I'm comfortable with the amount of people and my 3 dogs, and it's great that they have their houses and they can do that too. But I don't know if I would want to just Communes are great for the people that enjoy those, but on a national level, there's too much suffering that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, that would incur, because not everyone's going to be like on board. Ram Dass says, he talks about taking out the trash, and he's like, it's all great until it's Sunflower's time of turn to take out the trash, and she doesn't want to take out the trash. You know what I mean? But that's just the nature of reality. I mean, there's people, all people's paths are different. There's one mountain, but in one peak, but there's a billion paths. I mean, it's 8 billion now because of the amount of people are on Earth. So how could you help another person if you were just like, just breathe? You know what I mean? Just come back to center. You're God. Like the first, you try to tell your grandparents that's not going to help them. So it's like a constant shifting back and forth. And you, Dani, and I, and all the people listening who are trying to transmute their experience into wisdom, it's our job to figure out, okay, how much of the juice can this person handle?
Yes.
Right? Is it even my job to do that for this person? Did they ask for that? Right? Am I throwing too much food on one plate for this person? Right?
Yes.
When I go to my nephew, I say, hey, when you're angry, take a time out, think about it, just take some breaths, and then we'll talk about what happened. Right? You can tell me why you felt that way. But when I talk to my brother, who was on the journey with me in that two gram capacity, and I'm like, I'll like literally like piss him off on purpose, and he gets caught so easy, and then I'll be like, I mean, I'm caught too, right? But in that moment, I'm like, okay, this is a moment to teach. Like I can come back really quick now. It's like, oh shoot, I was angry at a game that I played with my brother, right? And we got a little argument, and I'm like, so I sent him Wayne Dyer's thing, because he's like, I'm mad at you because you did this, and I was like, oh, perfect chance. And the oranges, you can't, when he talks about you never get banana juice from an orange juice, like you get what is inside a person when you squeeze them. And so I'm always looking for those little moments to adjust and teach, and like that was a lesson for me too, because I got caught in the fact that I lost a pixelated screen movement. You know what I mean? I'm like, but that's a habit pattern from being a kid, and maybe we'll keep that one to balance out. But I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it. Is like, you wouldn't want to get rid of it's your best friend. Your ego is your best friend, right?
Yeah. Yes. And I used to say, oh, we don't need the ego needs to die, blah, blah, blah. Like, because everybody talks about it like it's the worst thing and like it's so separate from us.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, I think that the ego is necessary. I mean, if we didn't have an ego, we probably wouldn't be here on earth. Like we wouldn't be desiring anything, because we would just be kind of in spirit and doing whatever. And even my coach, Claire, she teaches me that like even monks who are desiring, not desiring, are desiring something. And they're actually like denying themselves from like life. And for a while, I was like, I just want to go be a monk and just forget about all this. Like, I don't want nothing to do with any of this. And in a way, and my dad said this one time, he's like, you're just denying reality. And I hated that he said that, but I was denying this reality in this incarnation. If I was supposed to be a monk, then I would probably be there, or I would go there. Like I would just trust that that's going to be my path. But my path right now is to be here in this society, studying spirituality, talking about it with people. And by me wanting to run off and do that is like me denying life. And so by us wanting to kill the ego, I think in a way is like us denying life and denying who, like our ego is like this Dani, this personality is Dani. And like, she shouldn't be in the front seat, but she can be in the back seat and put the soul in the front seat. And that part of me can drive the car, and the ego can maybe be a great servant to my purpose. So I roll around the ego stuff a lot in my mind. And even thinking that like, is the ego, this is what Claire talks about too. Is the ego real, or is it really just our insecurities? Like people have made this ego, this big thing, this entity that's so outside of us, but like, is it just really our insecurities and we're just bringing it outside of us and putting it there?
Yeah. That's a great question. Yes, is the short answer. Yes. I'm trying to think of how to word it. So like, it's a separation, right? When if you looked at me and you're like, Brad, those glasses look so stupid, can you take them off? We're doing a podcast, right? And I'm going to be like, damn, I thought my blue light glasses were, my eyes aren't dry though. Like, damn, Dani, you know what I mean? And then that little piece, I'm like, okay, to protect myself from what I'm feeling from that, I'm just going to put that to the side right now. And you do that as a child. I mean, think about the first few years of a normal American child's life is like you're being told what not to do, how to act, who to be, who to react to, how to react to them. You're modeling your parents. Like you don't really get to choose yourself until you get to the point where you realize how yourself was created.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I think you're dead on with that one. Like, because you're pushing it away, so you can. And then I talked to a neurophysiologist, I think she was, and she made the point of saying like, so how trauma, and I don't know to what extent this is correct or if I'm elaborating right, but she basically was saying as we go through life, we're constantly doing things, and especially in society nowadays, you have no time to rest.
Mm.
And so when you have a traumatic event, and then your parents is like, okay, but you got to get up and go to school tomorrow, whether you understand the fact that this happened to you or not. And then 10 years later, you're sitting alone and you take some psilocybin, or in my case, 25 years later, and all of the trauma of your entire life is now the ego's gone. So the bouncer, right, who's like, no, we can't do trauma today. We got to go play league for 10 hours, then we got to work tomorrow and rinse, you know what I mean? Then we got to go hang out with whoever. That person's suddenly gone, and then the brain's like, hey, remember all the shit that I packed in the back of your head so we could live our life for the last 25 years productively? Let's talk about it. And it was just massive healing for me. But the more you separate from yourself, the more you have this tension. And she was talking about how your brain actually doesn't communicate well, because one side deals with the trauma, and so it's constantly, and this side deals with, logic. Okay, we got to wipe our heinies after the bathroom, right? We have to do these things, and they never get a chance to truly sink, and that's where you miss out on creativity and to like I call it. And so the way I distilled it for my TED talk is basically just connecting back to yourself. And we talked a little bit about Wolf Boy and like how I used to run around in my underwear outside in the woods, and how, and those were the moments where I didn't care if you called me like a skinny little punk. I'd be like, oh yeah, what? And run away and be like, ha, and like hit you with the stick and shit. I was a little wild man, you know what I mean? But I wasn't collecting those things to buy out of some later, like when I go home and I'm sad about it, like, well, they're just stupid. Like I was like, oh, cool. I'm gonna go play Pokemon now. Then slowly over time, I'm like, wait a minute, I want a girlfriend. I need to have these attributes so these people will pay attention to me, this demographic. Oh, I need to graduate high school, blah, blah. And slowly you kill off the curiosity and the connection you had to. I mean, that's the source, right? It's like, what the heck's going on right now? When you're a baby, that is literally what you're. What the heck's going on right now? And touching everything and eating everything, and slowly, and that's why being a child is so beautiful, because you get enough ego tool to have fun, but you're not worried about like what's going to happen, right? When whatever you do gets you in trouble with your parents and you're grounded, you're like, yeah, whatever, I'll cry and mama let me out. Like, you don't care. And eventually we start to care so much that we lose. And I'm not saying go be a child again, but be curious, right? And the way my call to action is that I work with is basically just go put your feet in the dirt. Like go on a hike, take your shoes off, get your feet a little dirty, let your body talk with the earth a little bit microbially, reduce some inflammation. These are proven scientific things. And then slowly, that party that gets really curious, are you going to look up and see, is that, what kind of tree is that? And then luckily we've got the Library of Alexandria in our hand. So I mean, I have a little tree app, and I'm just like, what kind of tree is this? You know what I mean? And just constantly curious about everything on the walk. And that's, so I had a greenhouse. I didn't get a chance to get out there before I tried to, but I was too busy eating pops for lunch. They were delicious, by the way.
Pops are
And I
good.
took my shoes off out there, just water the trees. I love pops. We could talk about pops. You want to switch to pops? Okay.
I really love trees too, though. We could take the pops and go sit by a tree.
Yes.
So wait, you have a greenhouse with trees that you go water and sit by them? Tell me about that. That sounds amazing.
So in my closet, the light's off, but I do bonsai trees basically. I'm very novice, but basically I'm just growing trees, and I'll like curve the branch a little bit. But it's just really interesting it's just a space of just clarity. And I have just a classic tent greenhouse, and I go out there, and so it's a way to like force myself out into nature, right? Because I've got all these trees that I have to care for, and I've spent a bunch of money on them. And I go and I just take my shoes off and walk out there with bare feet, and dodge the dog cow pies, and just you feel that little bit of like, I'm just cultivating that space. And it's still hard for me to not be like, oh God, I just should have wore shoes, because what if I step on something and then I'll have to go to work with a hurt foot? And that ego is there, like, hey, we're still collecting on the side, we got things to pay. But that little child is like, let me out of here, like run in this grass right now. And I'm like, whoa, we got to watch for. And so that's the balance that I'm talking about. It's like, okay, I've taken the corporate, like UPS mindset, promotable, professional. Now let's bridge the two. And now I can really be of service to people at all levels, right? I can tickle my nephew and throw him around on the couch and stuff and talk about his emotions. And then I can go do a podcast about the highest level metagame there is in life and at least be somewhat useful, right? Which is my goal. And slowly you just realize it's really about just reducing suffering, because if I'm you, Dani, and you're me, the last thing I want to do is leave you with a bad vibration so you can spread that to all the people in your life. And then even though it dies out by the fourth person, it's still there subconsciously, right? And then, like, our children might get married one day, and the last thing I want is to, then I would be seeing it, is my point. I'd be like, holy shit, that's that one time I was mad at Dani and called her a smelly head. She took that and that, you know what I mean? And we passed that down to our children, that mindset, and that, well, don't talk to these type of people with beards and headsets with mics that are scrunchy, you know what I mean? They call you smelly head. And so the mind's just, you know what I mean? There's the first inlaid bias that we get before we can even realize what it means to be a compassionate person.
I love that. And you said something like it dies out by the fourth person. Is that
No, I was just,
you were just saying that? Okay, because
trying
I'm
to
all
be
about the
pragmatic
vibes and the
about
ripple
it.
effect. Okay. All right. I'm like, cool, more science for this.
I wish that could be a study we could do one day, Dani.
Yeah, how long does it last before the energy back? It probably lasts a while though, because
I would say, yeah.
people interact with a lot of people. Oh my God. It's like if you think about how
That's
COVID
my whole
spread.
point. Think about how just bad news spreads.
Yeah,
Same
so
thing.
quickly.
Like, yeah, if you can imagine one person angry, you can imagine the next person angry. Especially if I go downstairs and I'm like, hey guys, fuck you, I just did my first podcast. Oh, suck. You know what I mean? Because I have my own podcast, but I've never been asked onto one. So I was like, oh, I'm excited. I got super excited. And I'm like, finally, it's my time to share some wisdom.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So thank you for that. But you know what I mean? And that would, then they would never watch the podcast. And even if a dribble of this would have got, broken them out a bit, that's that negative vibration. I mean, it's like, that's why we have to deal with the fake gurus, Dani. We have to deal with them. You
Yeah.
gotta stop. I gotta stop it.
Fake
If you
guru.
haven't had the, I don't know. I'm just kidding.
No,
We
it's
gotta.
true though. There is like a guru culture happening right now,
Yeah.
and it's like really not what the guru was originally created to be. And it's almost like these gurus, and even I talk about Claire a lot because she's kind of my spiritual buddy and my mentor in this. She talks about she went to India and lived there for months. I don't really know how long. Did the yoga thing, and I guess had a really bad experience with the guru who eventually wanted like power over people instead of it being an even playing field and it being more empowering. It was like they wanted power over people. And I think that's what I'm seeing now with like this guru culture and people wanting to spread spiritual wisdom is they're taking it to a point where it's now like disempowering and it's like a business for them. And my friend that lives in India, he's like, don't come here and tell people that you're here for spirituality because to you, everybody looks like an Indian guru. He's like, and they will charge you, they will make money off of you. There's this and this. And he was like totally killing my romantic dream of India because I'm like, I'm thinking I'm going to go there and like be like Ram Dass and meet my guru and blah, blah, blah. And
Yeah.
he was like, you can't come here alone. And I was like, what?
That's why, yeah, I feel that so much because I'm too trusting. Thank God for the experience of, because now I could test people like, well, let me ask you, blah, blah, blah. And these are simple little tests. Like even with you were like, oh, that's so interesting. I had that the other day in 3 different things that I've done. Like that realization that we are essentially one thing is all the only thing I try. When I say God, all I really mean is if if you believe in science, the Big Bang was a tiny little one thing. If you believe in God, it was a tiny little one thing that started from a tiny little, like we're all connected. And there was no separation. It's not like the universe happened and then someone was like, all right, here's a grid, everything's separated by grid. You will now be Martian people, or this is all the things that will make up Andromeda, and this is all the things that the Hubble telescope will see. There's no like separation. It just all vibrated out, and eventually we kind of vibrated around, and we had some mushrooms in the Serengeti, likely. And you're like, wait, I want to keep that stick. I'm gonna fight you for it. Wah! There it was, humanity.
So you mentioned something like we're all connected. Have you ever heard of the laws of the universe?
Mm-mm.
Well, I'm sure you know all of them, but it's just like putting them in this little box. There's many of them. I give a presentation on this in my coaching program, Conscious Champion. It's kind of what I wanted my original talk to be on, but nobody really, I was kind of getting beat up for it a little bit. Because it's kind of a big topic, but it's the laws of the universe, and I present on 14 of them, but there are many. And so one of them is the law of divine oneness. Everything is one, everything is connected through this like web of energy or fabric of the universe or whatever it is, but everything is one. So that's the law of divine oneness. And it's all made up of the same thing, comes from the same thing, it's all the same source. And even speaking to like the collective unconscious. So why it's so important for us to try to be in a good state, for us to ascend and reach enlightenment and evolve, is because even though it's only doing it for ourselves and our lives, it is raising the consciousness of the whole,
Mm-hmm.
because of the law of divine oneness, because it's all
Yep.
it's all connected. And so I love the laws of the universe. I geek out on it. I give the presentation every time I can, because it makes so much sense to me. Even the law of vibration, the law of gender, polarity. Yeah, I just love it. But I'm sure you know about all of them. It's just, yeah.
Mm. All right, let me ask you, have you heard of the law of the 51%?
Maybe.
I made it up, so probably
Oh,
not
so
that.
no.
But you say that, so so that's something actually came, that was like my how do I tangibly teach this in a coaching package. Is like the way I do it is I literally just track my day, and none of my waking hours do I spend. So to your point, like everything vibrates into being from. So I mean, if string theory is remotely correct, right? We've got vibrations and we get quarks, and I think it's leptons and a couple other ones I can't remember. Those turn into molecule or atoms, which turn into molecules, which turn into blah blah blah. Slowly over time, we vibrate into humans, right? The transference of energy, or the transformation of energy, has always increased its output, right? That's even the point of like marriage, in my opinion, in terms of like the strictness of religion. And that's what I mean. Really, is like that whole like you have to be this, is because that it doesn't, and I'm not saying like male or female, it just means two people is one unit, right? That one unit can come together and make a new unit, whether it's through adoption or whatever, and they enrich that person with all of their combined universal juice, if you want to call it that, right? If say one person is 100, I think I looked it up, it's like at resting we have like 100 amps or something. I'm probably way wrong about that, but we carry a charge, right?
Oh.
So if you think about energy transforming, it increases. So when you decrease the universal energy, you're living out of law with act, like the literal physical law of the universe, that energy only gets more complex as it vibrates to a higher level. So if you're a human, almost in my estimation, probably the highest level of vibration in terms of complexity, along with the mind and the ego and all the thoughts you can have, and iPhones and Zoom, like much more complex than a planet. I mean, in terms of its construction, like you're basically the tip of the spear. So when you live your life in a way where you don't eat right, and that's where I created the 5 pillars of, like basically a foundational good life, right? And you find these in all successful people too. It's like one is like they all have good mental health. That's like the main thing. They read, they learn, they listen, all that stuff.
What are the 5 pillars? Now I'm curious.
So the 5 pillars are, first you start with I say start with physical health, because if you don't have energy to like put that extra hour in the day, right? If you're like obese, or you're on the opposite spectrum, you don't eat enough, or whatever the unhealthiness is, right? Not everyone can control that. So I mean, I'm not like coming after people, but that's the main thing you want to get in check, is like my energy level, right? And I used to go for a run. That was the first thing I started with. It's like my keystone is physical growth, right? So the 5 pillars of growth, physical growth is the first one. Then you go to mental growth, right? You start learning more, right? Like I talked about how I got out of high school and I was like, woo, don't teach me nothing. I'm a badass. Like, let's rock it. I go to job, blah, blah, blah. Now I read as much as I can. I listen. Like my job is literally listening to new information, new ideas. That's why I love it so much, right? I get to meet people like you, and you're like, yes, I got this great idea. It's like I'm a badass spiritual teacher and I want to teach people about it. And I'm like, great, teach me. You know what I mean? Or someone will come on, they're like, I want to build a school or a mental health hospital in Somalia, my home country, because there they treat it like they're in like they still I almost said pretend, but to them it's like a visceral, real thing that they're like cursed with a demon, right? But and so they don't even believe in mental health in a lot of those rural villages out there.
Wow.
And so I kind of lost my track. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, learning. So we were on the second pillar.
Yes. Sorry, I got off tangent because
No, it's
that's a really
okay.
interesting story, and I started to visualize it. Apparently, they like had her story is like she knew a person that was chained to a bed for like 17 years because they had a mental health condition and the family couldn't afford it. Blah blah blah. You know what I mean? All these different things. So I'm like, oh, that idea always hurts my heart. Anyways, sorry.
Oh,
Physical growth. You got to grow your body, have energy, so you can go help the people in Somalia. That's part of the reason I'm doing this is service is really the whole goal. Mental health. You got to learn, become better at what you do. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's having a podcast or being spiritual, whatever. Everyone's really good at something really easy. It's just they want to go and do this because it's popular, right? If you're really good at cutting grass, build a freaking grass cutting business and go make a bunch of money, give it back to somebody you care about, and you'll feel fulfilled. Like I can guarantee you'll feel more fulfilled than chasing a Lambo. Second or third, I'm sorry, is your financial growth, right? You have to, I mean, this is just the reality of life. It's the one that I like the least. But if I want to feed a bunch of people, I have to make a bunch of money. It's really just that true. That's why I switched my career and I'm trying to become a coach and build a little bit of an empire so I can have a nonprofit like Charity Water. I mean, the dude was just turned into a saint. He's like, let me just do this. And he figured it out, but it takes money to build these wells, right?
mm,
So you got to get your financials in check. And then after that, these are like the primaries, right? Then you've got your tertiary, like high level ones, right? And I was meeting these three at UPS, but I wasn't really meeting my relationships fully because I wasn't learning as much as I could. I was focusing on leadership and how to get promoted, but your relationship growth, right? You have to grow your ability to communicate with people and have a good relationship and really be there for people in a capacity that they can use, right? Which requires you to be physically fit enough so you can go and learn, so you can build an empire well enough to where you can spend 10 hours on Saturday talking to your family, or you know take some time and have a podcast with Dani and then go back to work after because you got a remote job because you wanted to do this type of work and a remote job's the best job, blah blah blah, blah, right? And they all compound, right? And then finally you have to start to be creative again. You have to have creative or spiritual growth, right? You have to be, I call it just have a good imagination. Like you just journal about your day. And so what I started doing was I love philosophy. So I would just try to like be really like philosophical with like, what am I feeling today? Right. And I would be like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm fearing the future. And I would be like, okay, I would just like journal out a scene where one of them was like I was in a lagoon and it was beautiful and calm and it was warm and everything was comfy. And this is after I had my buyout from UPS and I was retired because of COVID. And they retired me, so I'm an alumni at UPS now, and I'm just sitting in this lagoon and I'm like picturing off this anxiety and just being creative about it. It's a thunderstorm that's coming my way and I'm gonna have to deal with it. It's gonna shake me up for a bit, but it's just a thunderstorm, right? And so it doesn't have to be like go meditate on a mountain or have a podcast even about spirituality. It's just what is, and that's where we talk about meeting people where they're at. Like when I talk to my brother and he's still, I mean, he's 19, right? So give him some credit. Like the dude's far down the path at 19. He's farther than I was, which I'm sorely jealous of, but it's all right. We make the next generation better, right? It's Bradley. His name's Brady. Oh shoot, too late. His name's Brady, and I'm Bradley. So
oh,
he's like
cool.
Bradley 2.0. So I'm like, but I love the guy to death, and you got to be there for him in that capacity. But he's not. I mean, he wants to live his life and drive cars and stuff. And I'm like, Brady, let's go give back. And he's like, that's great. I'm a mechanic right now. This is what I like doing. And I'm like, yeah, I respect that. You'll be ready when you're ready, right? And if it takes 5 lifetimes for someone to be ready, I mean, they're ready already. It's just they haven't been to this one yet, or yours, or another person's, and that's what you slowly start to realize. Is like you're not gonna die and come back. Like we're not talking about that kind of spirituality where your ego is gonna suddenly be reborn in a new capsule, and you're gonna be like, oh, sick, I'm a baby now. I just have to pretend for 5 years that I'm not. It doesn't happen. This is a collection of memories, and that's one of the main things that psychedelics do. And this is a great point to stop my rant on is they inhibit your short-term memory and your ego literally can't collect. It's like, oh shoot, I'm useless for now. And that's that that's the bad trip. When people don't surrender to that, that's when you get a bad trip. I'm fully convinced. It's like if you don't surrender to it and you try to resist, that's you like beating your divine self down with the ego out of fear. And of course you're going to have a bad trip and freak out and lose your mind, but some people aren't ready for it yet to surrender. And so yeah,
Mm.
tangent over. So you're
Surrender.
excited.
No, I love it. It's good. It's so good. Surrender. And we even started with that word today too. I think at the very beginning of the podcast, it was surrender. And I'm just looking, I made some notes about the full moon and lunar eclipse, and I feel like some of that surrender energy is in there too. But anyway, so surrendering. So have you ever heard the term resisting is what is? Wait, suffering is resisting what is?
Yeah, yeah, I hear that.
I forget who said that. Eckhart Tolle, maybe somebody like that. But that reminds me of like the psychedelic trip where people resist, and that creates suffering. And even in our life, like, okay, so the thing with UPS happened. It's like if you just resisted that and resisted it, it would create more suffering instead of just it is what it is. How am I going to go forward? And I think so many people are in this almost like addictive, resisted thought
Hmm.
pattern where they like to
Exactly.
resist everything and they create so much disharmony and suffering for themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to comment on. I'm so happy I remembered it. But you said the Buddhist way, and I don't know that much about Buddhism as much as I do like Hinduism. Um, the middle path. So what is the middle path about?
So the middle path is basically, and this is really what I like to do is, quote spiritual teacher, sprinkler, or whatever, whatever the world decides to label me. Um, it's like they're all connected. So the middle path, right, essentially means you walk the path of temperance. And this is like, and you can compare it to like Socrates and his virtue theory, basically. So like if you walk the middle path, you're temperate, right? So an instance would be like, instead of being greedy, which is, indulgence, or like piousness, where you're like, I don't take any money and that's just my religion, I can't spend money ever. Those are extremes of either way.
Mhm.
And those are what keeps you attached, right? It's like the golden chain, for instance. Like you can be attached to cocaine, which is, the bad chain, or like oh, that's just a bad person. Or you can be attached to, I'm a person who's bettering themselves,
Yes.
right? You can
Yeah.
be attached to, I'm a meditator, I'm enlightened. That's literally the story of Osho. I mean, anybody who protects their compounds with AK-47s is not, like, you've stopped your journey, right? Like, you've stopped your journey, my friend. You forgot the main thing. We're all connected, and if you pass that vibration on, like, yeah. But to your point, it it's basically just being. I think the best way to put it is just, you can't peel the skin off a snake. You have to let it shed. And so walking the middle path is, you don't resist the fact that you might want to smoke weed, or resist the fact that you want to drink sugar in the form of whatever, but you're aware of it. You're there when you're drinking it. You're like, okay, I'm drinking it when, like, I need to balance this somehow. Maybe I need to go to the gym a little longer. Maybe I drink less later. And slowly over time, that's the middle path that you come back, right? You pull yourself into this, you know, like Zionism. They talk about the temple and like dreads and all that, right? I know you had dreads. It's like really honoring this as your temple of like awakening, right? Because and they're realizing the gift that you get from walking the middle path is, like, you get to, like, you need the body to get to enlightenment, because you have to be able to be conscious, right? If you are missing teeth and you're constantly in pain, it's going to be really hard for you to really find yourself. So you have to have that in your hygiene, right? You don't take 7 showers a day, like what was that guy, the guy who made the planes, and he was hypochondriac. I can't remember that movie. It's Leonardo DiCaprio. He's like, the planes, way of the future, way of the future.
Rain
But
Man?
it wasn't Rain Man, but basically his mom, like, was a hypochondriac, and she would watch him all the time, and so he became too in the excess of clean, right? And that, like, turned him basically insane, and he got
Mhm.
OCD massively. And that's literally where anxiety comes from, is like, you've been told that you're something you're not, or you've had this traumatic experience and you're pushing it away instead of surrendering to it. And just, but you don't have those skills at age 9, right? That's that's just the way it works. Like, I don't know a better way to say it. It's up to us to teach one, let them teach one, and do a better job raising kids, because there's no like pill that I can give you to enlighten you about the middle path. You have to literally have the experience of being in excess and waking up with a hurt tummy when you ate 5 fruit roll-ups the last night, right? And slept 2 hours because you were gaming Legend of Zelda. Or the opposite, if you studied for 20 years of your life and now you have 5 friends and they're all material friends, you know what I mean? It can happen to us in many different forms, but the middle
Mhm.
path is when you come back and you just, it's about, and I don't think it gets evolved, right? Because you're doing the middle path, but you're also living your life and you've had these other experiences, but you've been in excess, right? You were in excess of like identifying with your body, and now and then you went back to almost too much or I'm sorry, you were excess identifying, then you were excess or intent, whatever the word is. I forget the actual scholarly terms. School's been out for a few weeks now, but you had not enough identifying, right? When you had the dreads and you're like, just need to be who I am. Now you're in the middle path, but that takes time and experience, and that's why Socrates was like, I'll drink the poison, guys. This is because his goose was cooked, right? He had lived the middle path. He wasn't collecting these anxieties and traumas that he would have to heal from, in a week before he went up to trial. So in that week, he was just there, and this is what the people want. He's realizing all these deep philosophical things, but it's really
Mhm.
the spiritual awakening. He's like this. He's basically saying, I am the city. The city is me. If they want me, if this is how they react to truth, then so be it. I'll just drink the hemlock. I think it was, or nightbane. I think. And I mean, you could do that with, you could put Jesus right in there. That's, I mean, when he wasn't. I heard this, and it was one of the most beautiful things I ever heard in my life. Is Jesus wasn't like hurting on the cross. He was weeping for joy, like in joy that he could be there and do that. For he was strong enough to be there spiritually for people in the capacity of literal crucifixion. Right. That's why people follow Jesus, because he had that kind of leadership. It wasn't because he was like, I'm gonna turn your water to wine for you next week, when you don't catch fish, John. But he had that leadership quality. He was like, we're not going to turn away from the ideas and values of, and whatever it was for him. I often like fantasize about him just like, it's a hot day, he just built a house, and he's walking around the desert, and he just gets to, maybe he has like a heat stroke, and the ego gets away from him enough there, and it's just light enough to where he doesn't like pass out. Who knows? They probably just dealt with it back then. They're probably just like, he's fine. Well, it can happen in so many ways, and I just, with all of these spiritual icons like Ramana Maharshi, he laid down in his uncle's study and was like, "Oh, sweet, I'm enlightened now. I died." And he had that. He just literally felt it randomly. And he was like, "Okay, I'll surrender to the experience of death, like ego death." At 17 years old, like what? I don't. Who chooses those things? Like, like it's arbitrary. It just, your vibration gets lucky, and you get to see it. That's what is so beautiful about it. Is like, and I like, to your point about like the holotropic breath and stuff. And I had the thought, it's almost like the more you live in the spot, there's almost times where I drive down the street and I'll look at a set of beautiful trees that are just like, the light's hitting them just right, and it's just warm enough, and some music's on, or it's Ram Dass and he's talking about something just beautiful, and I'm just like, I can just get a hit of it right there. I'm like, this is just fucking pure heaven, dude. I'm complete right here. Just being able to see this beauty. And that's the practice that you can do in life if you don't want to be a spiritual teacher, if you don't want to go to India, or if you don't want to meditate. Is just be able to follow that middle path where you're able to serve for people and get that fulfillment, but you also have these moments where you can serve yourself and realize how just fucking fantastically lucky we are to live in, not only in America, but to have not been sick of some ailment or had a genetic deficiency. Like, there's so many things that could have went drastically wrong in life, but we get to be here and just see, the, I mean, it's fucking beautiful. I could just sit here and weep at it. I was like, you're not gonna do that. I was like, this is the biggest teaching I can bring people today. And I was like, just be here now. And I was like, no, just don't.
Be here now. I have a Be Here Now shirt on, by the way.
That's awesome. I need to read the book, but I start reading it and I'm like, I've heard 200 hours of this lecture. I know, like, but I
You
feel
know,
like I owe it to him.
I have it too. It's over there, but I have not read it yet. But it's coming. It will one day. But I listened to it so much anyway. So same thing. But about the middle path. So my mentor said something the other day, and she's like, she explained this beautiful visualization to me. And it was like, there are two banks, and in the middle is this river, which is like the flow of life. or the flow. And then she said, you know, you don't want to get stuck on the bank of pain or pleasure. You maybe
Exactly.
bump up against them sometimes, but you really just want to be in the middle. And she also related it to, I think it was imagination and reality. You don't want to be too far in one or the other, but the middle
Exactly.
path is the way. So that's why I talked to her Thursday, yesterday. And so we just had a conversation about the middle river. And I just thought how beautiful that was, because it's okay to maybe bump up on one side a little bit too much
Yeah.
one time or the other, but getting stuck up on the pain bank. And some people like that they're stuck on the pain bank and they're scared to go back into the flow. But it's like getting them off of that, you know, whatever, either side too. So I really like the middle path because, yes, to your point earlier, I did do bodybuilding and I was very much in the physical realm, being judged on my body. It was the biggest, how am I, you know, lean enough, big enough, strong enough, whatever it was. And then I kind of like renounced all of that and went to the spiritual path and stopped working out totally and kind of got into yoga. But even then, I wasn't using my physical body how I should be. Even now, I'm still not. I'm like so capable. It's so annoying. Like I was born with this athleticism, but I don't really want to go back to the gym anymore. And so I look at these yoga things. So I'm finding my way back to the middle of like physical fitness again.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm so capable and I should be doing a lot more with it, but I'm so up in my business right now, like being conscious champion, that it's hard for me to get to that point, but I'm coming back to the middle path of that, to where it's like not an overindulgence in the physical, the superficial realm, but not totally renouncing it. And I think that, you know, we're gonna talk about Ram Dass for a minute. He said something to where he was like way spiritual and was almost not honoring his physical body, his human body. And then he had the stroke or something. And then he was like, oh, this thing does matter. And I don't even know if that was even the way that he said it or whatever, but I heard that and I was like, oh, this incarnation does matter.
Yeah.
Dani, this ego does matter. Like the spirit stuff does matter, but so does this. And I think that was like maybe 2 years ago that I heard that. And it's been dropping in year after year a little bit more. So I just have to say thank you for saying that, because that was a big moment for me, and like honoring both, all of me, all sides of me. And now I'm learning about even like the inner child. And there are so many different sides of us that need honoring, like the inner child, the masculine side, the feminine side, the shadow work, everything has its purpose and should be honored and revered. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah, that's beautiful though. I mean, you'll find your way back into it somehow. You're gonna like do a yoga position one day, and next day you wake up like sore, and you're like, oh, perfect. And then slowly, I think giving ourselves patience is so hard to do in this day and age. Like if you're a failure at anything, you don't fail forward anymore. So many people just fail, and they're like, well, ah, I'll just stick
Hmm.
here. I'll hang out here then. You got to be, you know, willing to fall on your face in search of, whatever truth you're looking for.
Yeah. Yes. So many people don't want to fall on their face. They're like so afraid of it that they never try. And I have to say, I thank bodybuilding for allowing me to fall on my face, because I failed my way to the top, is what I tell everybody. And like, I just like one show after the other, boom, boom, boom. This is all adding up to my perfect formula. So even with business now and doing what I'm doing, it's like, I mean, I don't love the failures because they kind of sting a little bit. My ego gets hurt, but they're always a learning lesson. You know, it's just like, get back up on the horse and do it again. Keep perfecting, keep going, keep going. So what did you say? Fail forward. I think that's great.
It's one of our company core values, actually.
Wow.
But I had it before we came here, though. So if they ask, I don't know who came up with it first, but I'm just saying.
So like, what do you hope to do in the world? Like, what is your kind of like, when I grow up, I want to do this?
Yeah. So the reason I did everything up until this point, including this podcast, is because it's almost like, I don't want to call it a duty because it's more of a gift, but you just reduce suffering the best you can. Like, what do you do once the goose is cooked? You eat it. And eating it, like, the goose doesn't eat itself. Does that make sense? Like, you wouldn't cook a goose and then watch it eat itself. And to your point, that's why I started going to the gym, is because I was like, okay, if I'm going to produce, like, back to the 5 pillars, like if I'm going to have enough energy to get enough money to build relationships and do podcasts in between work with people like you, and one day can help me feed people, right? And
Mhm.
actually want to feed people. That's, I need to do these things and get myself to that point to, so the what do you want to be when you grow up is hopefully I'll never grow up first. 'Cause that's what got me into the problems in the first place. I tried to grow up, and you grow up the middle path, right? You grow up while you fall in the mud here and there, and wreck your car or something. I don't know. But I would mainly, the first thing is just get everybody fed in a sustainable way, whether that's, and that it's like a two-part system, right? And you'll love this. I use the chakra system. I was just reading about the chakra system one day, and I was like, oh, this is a perfect guide to like enlightening the literal entire planet. Is like, first you got to feed everyone, right? That's first level chakra is like, can I eat, sleep, water? Okay, good. Second level chakra is like, okay, can I procreate? Can I have, I don't, it's not really sexual pleasure. It's just the need to, birth people, right? Like the
Mhm.
groin, whatever. I'm not super studied on these, but I know that the names and kind of what they do. And then you get the gut chakra, right? Which I know is ego and collection and power and money and all that. And once you can get far enough into the heart chakra, that's where you lead with love at all times, right? It's the heart that's speaking. It's not the ego. It's not the, and so how do you get people there worldwide, right? Step one, we need to make sure everyone has a sustainable way to eat, not just feed them, right? Because Jesus didn't give people fish. He said, go out and fish, right? Socrates didn't say, here's the deal, guys. I don't really want to drink the night bane. This is really what happened. This guy's kind of right. I'm just being a prick because I want to use the Socratic method to bring out your inner divine person. Let's just call it off. He was like, he committed, right? He gave them the fish. He's like, fine, reap the rewards. Then I'm gone, and you'll have to learn yourself. And so, you, it's tricky, but essentially, you got to find a way to help everyone feed themselves, right? I don't like. I'm thinking like, how the hell would I? A little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, there's people doing this with billions of dollars, but that's really what it comes down to. And so how will you do that, right? I don't have the plan for that really yet. I would think maybe populate, but it kind of ties into number two, right? Is like, so for instance, in India and a lot of the rural countries or rural areas in every country, really, including America, people have a lot of kids, right? Because if you don't have health insurance and you can't take care of yourself, who's going to take care of you? Maybe one of your 9 kids. Also, you got to work the farm. So if you don't want to pay for labor and you're a poor Indian farmer who loses, 20% yield every 5 years because of the land and the farming methods and yada yada, you're gonna have to. We got to find a way to not population control or say like you can only have 2 kids, but like we got to get creative. How do we help people? It comes down to education, right? You educate the shit out of people, and then they're like, okay, cool. And then you empower the shit out of women, and then women don't have to just have kids whenever they want. And then the country. I mean, that's the main indicator. Christopher Hitchens always said this when he was like battling religious people on debates. It's like the number one way to predict to grow an economy and a country's like value is empowerment of women, because they don't have 5 kids every 5 minutes because someone makes them, and they can go out and get jobs and earn and build a life and a podcast and be a champion, right? And so that's the real tough one. It's hard to get by. I mean, we haven't been able to do it yet, but that's because we're all up here. We forgot about those first 2 layers, and the people who got to the ego layer were like, wow, it's really nice to have a fucking Cadillac and an AC unit, right? Like yeah, those other people deserve to come along with us, but also we're in America, and this goes back into that bias you get when you're a kid and you start that journey of the ego. Is like, well, we can help those people, but we got to make sure this is our country and we deserve this stuff. And then you learn and you educate, right? And you realize, holy shit, it's really my fault because I eat $2 fish. Like, I'm reaping all of the rewards of, so like the Somalian pirates and all these movies that are like, oh, these assholes, they fucking took Tom Hanks' ship. Like, that's literally huge. Like, that's countries, modernized countries, just overfishing the same oceans they used to literally fish out of for probably hundreds of years in that tribe, in those specific tribes, right? And once all the fish are gone, what are the people who are poor going to do? They're going to take your boat because that's all they can do. They don't have skills. They're fishermen tribes, right? So we're creating all these problems on our, like, and we see them and we know, and we're like, yeah, but the system works really well now. We don't want Americans to suffer because then the economy might go down, the stocks will go down, and then I can't afford my super jet. And I don't know, I get all those things, but like I always say this to people, and I believe it. Rich people could be massively rich while not like I don't want to be massively rich. I'd love to be wealthy and financially free and help people feed themselves, but like you can still have billions, Jeff Bezos. There's ways to do it without, what's the place that everyone talks about with the iPhones in China? It's like some Amfox or something, Foxconn factory where they had like nets up because people were just jumping to their deaths because it was such a miserable life. Literally. And
Oh,
but we have iPhones, like mine's right here. Like I'm the first to, and that's the middle path. It's like holy shit, I fucked up. Like now I'm not gonna get like this is an iPhone 12, I think. What are we on? 14, 13 and S. That you see that's the shedding of the skin. Comes with knowledge. The snake skin slowly falls off. You're like, oh, buying a gasoline car is now contributing to this and that and that. And while I may not think that there's enough parts for electric, like so you got to do something. Drive less then. Ride a bike to the gym if it's close enough. And so you slowly. Well, you got to get here first though. So what's the judo move to get people there first? Your podcast. Voila. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm giving these type of things my time. Is once you get to the point where you figure out really the only thing you can do is awaken more people so they can do less harm, give more of their massive 1%. I mean, $25 to charity water in 10 years will help more people than 90% of America does, just because we're complacent. We're Americans. I'm complacent. Look at my dirty room. Like I got a sheet on my bed because the dogs are muddy. But I love my dog, so I let him on my bed, and then I complain about the mud still. But that's being human. And you got to surrender to that. And when you piss off your brother, you got to call him the next day and be like, hey, I'm sorry I pissed you off about that game, brother. I love you, which is what I did earlier. And you surrender to the moment, you just move on, and you don't push it away. You surrender to it and you say, this is what I did and I'm sorry. And I take full extreme ownership. What can I do to, like Tony Robbins? Hey, I'm sorry I did that. What can I do next time? Instead of, well, you did this 2 years ago. So you know what? I think we're even, prick. And then you spread more bad vibrations, and then they don't listen to the charity water ad because they're still pissed off, and instead they don't donate the $5 that they're going to go spend on cigarettes.
hmm.
Human
So
nutrition.
I feel like it's like awakening, helping people with awareness and awakening is what you want to do and what you are doing.
Yeah, basically. And
Mm.
hopefully we'll build some credentials and sell books, and you know Seva is a great like institution of what and Love Serve, remember those types of things. Charity water, right? Bring that up a lot, but they're doing a lot of good, and that guy still probably lives pretty well. I mean, he deserves it too. He's doing the things that we should be doing with our massive wealth, but instead we're like, dude, I would love one of those new fucking Corvettes. They're sweet.
Yeah.
And as much as I would love a new Corvette, that's probably not going to be the first thing I buy if I get a bunch of money. You know what I mean? And I think back to the universal law thing is, so what if you give 80% of your day for someone else, right? What happens when you're 60 and you decide, okay, I've done enough? And that's not a 401k cash in, that's a universal cash in. That's when you get good health and good memories, and everyone around you is happy and safe and fed and
Mm.
well. And you realize I didn't just figure out how to move boxes more efficiently for the next 35 years, which is great. We need commerce. People that do that are key people in the chain of economy and all that. But just yeah, I don't know. This wasn't for me. I don't want to talk shit about UPS because I loved UPS and they were instrumental in my awakening because I learned discipline and I had great fucking mentors there. But yeah, I mean, eventually you just get to the point where like I just want to surf, and that becomes it becomes your job then to wrangle your ego at every point, start to serve, and so yeah, feed people and peel off their skin a little bit, give them a little bit, you know what I mean? I'll be that warm stone the snake walks by. And it's just that simple too. It's just that simple where it's just a little nudge and a little more skin comes off, and I don't stop the snake. The snake doesn't bite me. I don't crush the snake. I get to be there for the snake in the capacity that it can handle, for as
Mm.
long as it can handle it, and then it moves on. And the next stone, like Dani, a little bit more can come off. Blah blah blah. And if there's enough stones, we don't got any problems. But materialism in Western culture has produced a huge void of those stones. So that's why you see like it's a rubber band effect, right? The human, like this was my first like theory of everything. It's like I bet you like if you think about neurons in the mind, and there's 8 billion people, like we're the neurons of the planet. Like we think as if we thought as one, like hey, we need to save the ocean. it'd be done in 5 years, 10 years, where we'd have a great fucking plan and it would be done in 20 years.
Yeah.
But we don't think that. We think, okay, China's going to have this in a few years. Russia has this much power. Oh shit, Russia invaded Ukraine, and now we have to deal with this idiot muffing up the whole plan, right? That was one of my trip. One of the big things in my trip is like I kept getting this feeling of like, oh, it's so perfect, but we're fucking it up. Like it was like a like a communication is like it was like, dude, I love you and like I don't want to hurt you, but you're fucking it all up. Like and I just kept hearing it like, oh, and I was like, oh, I hear you. So like you could just hear it loud and clear. It's like we're killing it. We're literally killing the planet wholesale. But it's hard to blame people. I mean, it's not something that you have to find it. That's the fun of it. That's what makes it this beautiful thing. And it's like a little tag game with God. You're like hee 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 hee, and then you fall back a little bit and you cuss someone out on the highway, and God's like, and then you meditate for 2 hours one day, and you just have a great day, and you're like, got you. It's just a little tag, right? Like Maharaji and Ram Dass.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I was gonna comment on something, but it left me. Oh, you said quickly about the law of compensation, how like we do stuff today and it's not necessarily like a monetary cash in, but it's a universal cash in. That's what I believe. So like with my course, I sometimes give discounts. I let people in for free. Like I'm kind of just like nobody, can't come in, basically just talk to me, just like let me know. Because I believe in the law of compensation, which is just what you said, that like I will be taken care of. It may not be in a tit for tat exact money exchange, but I have this underlying trust that like, if I do good and put out good and serve well, then like I will be taken care of in whatever capacity that I'm going to be needed to be taken care of in. So I'm really happy that you said that, because that's how I operate and live my life. And, I always say I'm a business coach is like kind of worst nightmare because of that, because I have this underlying belief that like everything's going to be okay. And I'm totally going to get like that energy is going to come back to me someday. Maybe it's not today. Maybe it's not in this launch, but it will. And so I'm really happy that you said that. That just is awesome. And yeah, it all comes back to serving. Love, serve, remember. That's it. It really is that simple.
Yeah, you remember who you are, then you go, oh wow, I love you, I love everyone, then you just go serve. Because and it's not like you give you're out there giving hugs and kissing everybody or doing anything. It was just being there in the capacity you can be for someone, right? What can they handle? Is it you buy them their drink at McDonald's when they're upset about the price, you just ease that tension for them? Or is it you know volunteering at hospice and being there at the end of someone's life and trying to be as be the the light in the fog of all of that pain and trauma and suffering and chronic illness, and you're just like, yep, this way, I'll just show you. Yep, and you just try to be there for them in that little bit each time, right? Like, and if they can't see it, they can't see it. But it's our job to be there for them in that capacity, right? And just eat the suffering, like Ramdas says.
to be there, not do something. I think we get so caught in between being and doing, and people don't be enough. That's something I'm learning, is like, it's okay to just be me. I don't have to do and overgive and do all the time, but it's enough to just be.
Yep.
And that's really nice.
So true.
This has been lovely, Bradley. Thank you for this enlightening conversation. Oh my goodness. I feel so
My
lifted up
pleasure.
and so nourished. Even though I haven't had food, I feel totally good about it. I was worried, like I was just like, man, I hope that I can show up, but I was totally engaged and like great today. So, and I really attribute that a lot to our conversation. So thank you. And you said you had a podcast. Where can people find it? Or is it, what's the name of it?
It's called Mastering the Mind it's Mastering the Mind on YouTube with Alex and Brad. It's basically, I don't do it really anymore. I just haven't had time. I was in school and I would sit there and edit the podcast. I'm kind of OCD about it. And I would just, it takes 2 hours, and just logistically, I was like, let me just wait on this. So my
Okay.
goose is a little more cooked, but yeah, I mean, you just find me on LinkedIn or Instagram or wait, I have no back end. No, just kidding. No, see, that's something that gets me too. But is like I don't feel like I could ever like to your point. It's so beautiful. I feel like charging someone for this kind of wisdom is like it's the cardinal sin. Is like you're turning it material and like, but I don't know. Maybe one day I'll get over it and I'll be able to live off of it a little bit. But until then, just give anything that you would love to give to me or viewership, or just give to Dani. And then I'll come back and enrich this podcast again at a later date, and maybe I'll go to the Himalayas or something. And come back and have a beer and shit.
We
I'll
should
be
do
like,
this again.
yeah,
I
whenever.
would. Okay, cool. I would love to have a conversation again. This was super fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
Enjoy your day. Your golden frog is so awesome. I love it.
Thank you.
He is
This is my
vibing.
spirit space.
Yeah, I got the little induction stove there. Not induction, but whatever it's called.
It's something a little. My dad gave it to me. He's like, "Hey, do you want this? We're gonna bring it to the dump." And I was like, well, because this room that I'm in doesn't have heat. So in the wintertime up here in Massachusetts, it gets cold in here. And it has it looks like a little fireplace. It's pretty cute. So it's my little heater.
Well, that's awesome. And I look forward to coming back. Thank you to the viewers and to you for having me. And I don't have like a catchphrase, but just remember to just be there. Just put a little space between the thought and the action. Just remember, what's going on. Just take a look, right?
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And everybody, thank you so much for watching or listening. I appreciate your time and energy as always. And I will see you on the next one. Peace.